You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the BioHealth Capital Region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis. I'm your host for BioTalk. And as you know, we introduce and interview regional leaders that are making significant contributions to the BioHealth Capital Region, which is Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. And we have one of the newest entrants to the BioHealth Capital Region. They're coming in a big way. And it's an international company landing in Frederick, Maryland. And we're going to talk with Jeff Boyle, who's the president of Ellume USA. And it's a really exciting story for the listeners. And most of you have not heard about this yet, even though you may have read about it in the press. Jeff's going to give you the straight scoop on everything related to what's going on with Ellume, the United States, and the relationship with Australia. So, Jeff, welcome to BioTalk.
Thanks for having me.
We're all excited to hear more. But before we get into the story about Ellume, I think the listeners are going to be more interested to learn about you personally and how you've evolved in your career to get to where you are today, Jeff.
It wasn't something as planned as in most people's careers. You sort of look back and say, how did it get here? So I started in Canada, Canadian, then migrated to Australia, where I finished my studies and got into biotech, originally in vaccines development with a biopharmaceutical company in Australia. And then joined a spin-off from that company and entered into the diagnostics fray and really started to build a business with them. And we were acquired by a local company, QIAGEN, and convinced to come across the pond and transfer that tech, and slowly over the next decade built that business up in the U.S. and ended up running a franchise for QIAGEN. And that's where I met Ellume when we were looking for a partner to help solve a problem in TB diagnostics, and came across Sean and Ellume and their technology, and now have joined Ellume as president.
That's very interesting, Jeff, because what started out as looking for a strategic partnership with a company to meet one of QIAGEN's needs. And for background purposes, QIAGEN also was one of the founding board members of BioHealth Innovation. So we've had a long-term relationship with QIAGEN, and it's going to continue with them, but also with you now as an extension of that. But I guess at the end of the day, it was fortuitous for you to identify Ellume in Australia as one of the solutions for QIAGEN technology. And a lot of people don't know about Ellume and their history. So if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about Ellume and their background, history, and then also we'll get into what led to the entry into the United States later. But let's talk about the origination of Ellume.
That was really where I started with them probably 4 years ago now, and really starting to get the story. And I was hooked, as was many of us at QIAGEN, to see what had started out as Sean Parsons' vision as a clinician dealing with the last pandemic, and realizing a lot of the shortfalls of the approaches that were being taken, and decided to leave medicine and put on the hat as a designer, developer, entrepreneur, and started Ellume to really come up with the tech and solve the underlying problems associated with pandemics. And I think that's really what we have to do. I think is a lot of times there's technology out there searching for solutions, whereas he's really started with what's the problem, and then how do we find the technology to solve that. And as we've just lived through this now, these problems are still evident, unfortunately. And so certainly our tech is there and is going to be a key player as we come out of this one, and with the US government start to prepare for the next one. And I think when you talk about what were the problems and what are the problems that the solutions that we have at Ellume solve, there's a few, and they're pretty key. One is that you're blind without a good diagnostic. You don't know what to do. You don't know where to go. And relying on a public health infrastructure or even a private infrastructure to respond to that, as we saw, is just not doable. You need something that's truly scalable, that can get out to ordinary people, a technology that has the performance that you would get from a professional use test, but able to be done by an ordinary person. So it has to be simple and it has to be high performance. That's problem number one that was solved with the at-home testing solution. And problem number two was that information is key. And if you don't know what that test result and it doesn't get to the right people, it might as well not have been done. So that was the second and really key part to the tech, was building that cloud infrastructure that says we're going to capture that data, we're going to take that out of the hands of ordinary people to interpret tests, have the test reliable, be able to get that result, and then get it into the right people that say, what are the results, where are they, and then enable them to respond in an appropriate manner.
With the development of this technology and test in Australia, how did the U.S. government come to learn about it and then ultimately end up in some partnership with an Australian company?
That really started early on with Sean again and his vision around how do you get this engagement with governments to be ready. And so those discussions started a decade ago and continued. And it was really centered around flu as they developed a flu-based product with the eye that flu would likely be a pandemic player, engaging with the FDA to get that approved and to build the right test to get all the right controls, et cetera, into the test technology, and at the same time engaging with players like the CDC as well to talk about how best do you engage with the US government to get ahead of the next one. And then the pandemic hit right in the middle of all of that. And so that was when RADx came and recognized Ellume as a good technology and quite a unique player in that really had been at the forefront of this in terms of developing these over-the-counter tests for this purpose. But as we had this collaboration with QIAGEN for a high throughput test, and also Ellume have the at-home test, but also a professional use version of the test. So it's one test across 3 platforms. So RADx really saw this as good investment in terms of accelerating that development, and also recognizing that Ellume's vision was really to be a development company focused on innovation, create great products, and then partner those out. And with the pandemic was thrust upon the world stage in terms of having to take up the burden of becoming a manufacturer as well. So RADx also provided support there for the manufacturing startup. And as those programs went forward, then there was some serious commitments made by the Department of Defense to really get this technology transferred over onto the US soil, set up a facility that's able to respond in the future, transfer the tech, get the skills there, and be able to respond.
And so when you mention RADx, a lot of people probably don't know what RADx is, but I guess that's the HHS program for the development of rapid diagnostics. Is that correct?
Yeah, they had a number of different programs, of which there was point of care, at-home testing as part of that, was really to fast track a lot of this development and the investment needed in manufacturing scale up for diagnostic players.
And the size of the agreement was pretty sizable with the U.S. government as a first agreement. In the press releases I've read, it was $231 million, which really gives a company a great amount of money to do it right, I would imagine.
It is huge, and it's important because it gives you some certainty around putting your own money in and your own investment to meet that. So absolutely critical in terms of giving us that certainty around coming and establishing the facility.
And then also you mentioned the FDA with what you were doing around the flu test, but I think that Ellume got some emergency use authorization, EUA, as a result of how important it could be related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Could you talk a little bit about it, your interaction and relationship with the FDA during this process?
A lot of that was very interactive, positive. At-home testing was seen as a top priority for the FDA. And so the engagement was very timely, and we were able to get an approval and be the first true over-the-counter test that was approved that really met all of the criteria. Again, as we've been dealing with them with flu, there was a good understanding of what the requirements would be to develop such a test, and they had a good understanding of it. So that really helped in terms of the FDA having confidence in the technology.
A lot of people and the listeners basically understand that the FDA sometimes becomes very bureaucratic, but has been very nimble during the COVID-19 pandemic. So can you explain from the time that it was identified that you might have an OTC home COVID test and it was introduced to the FDA to look from a regulatory process, how long did it take from the beginning to the end before you got your EUA with the FDA?
I'm not 100% sure on these dates, so maybe I would have to get back. It's in the magnitude of months, so certainly much faster than what was normal.
I think normally people are accustomed to years, and it was very impressive with the accelerated regulatory approvals that the FDA went through because of the crisis that was happening with the pandemic. It shows that you actually can create a little entrepreneurial spirit within a bureaucratic federal agency sometimes, huh?
I mean, that I think has been really quite remarkable. I'd say I wouldn't want to have been in the FDA's shoes. From what we understand, they were fairly overwhelmed by the amount of work and were really good at prioritizing and engaging to stay focused and get things done in a timely manner. And also with HHS and the Department of Defense, I'd say that has also been incredibly nimble as it continues to be. It's been a tough time for everyone. If a plan survives a day, you probably missed something or it was a bad plan, but you have to be nimble. And so we've been like that. And so have the Department of Defense in terms of being able to adapt to what is a continuous changing environment with incredible challenges that have put everyone really into a tough situation.
And then also, I guess it was probably that $231 million agreement to set up this operation in the United States somewhere that stimulated the dialogue between you and Ellume regarding a position. Maybe talk a little bit about how that evolved with your discussions with Ellume and what decisions led to your taking the president of the Ellume USA.
Given the timing that was required, it really helped to have somebody come in who had a history with Ellume and would not take that 6-month learning curve to come up to speed with a lot of those things and establish the relationship. So on that side, I think it was a good fit. And in terms of then starting from scratch, it helps to have a background in the area and in IVD to go out and recruit a whole team to start this whole process.
So basically, it was a relatively seamless transition because you'd already had a relationship, understood the company, and QIAGEN had a long-term relationship with Ellume, and the parties knew one another.
For sure. And it also, I think, is something that doesn't compromise our ongoing partnership because it's something that's going to be critical for us for the long term as well, to continue on the work that we had started.
And then also, you brought on another person who's very familiar with our region to assist from a business development standpoint, Dan Mallon. So had you established a relationship with him over the past years as well?
No. So Dan was really boots on the ground first in terms of a hire. So he came on to Ellume officially before I did, as I had to complete things up and hand over. So Dan was on the ground and really has continued to be a great leader, and as is all startups, has been able to wear many hats and answer the call as we have to build these things. And as we're building out our team now, has just continued to be a strength. And as you say, he's got a tremendous level of experience in the area, dealing with government-based contracts and understanding how to navigate through those.
And I think another interesting thing for our listeners, and we're talking with Jeff Boyle, who's the president of Ellume USA, is that it wasn't immediately determined that Ellume was going to locate in the state of Maryland. I guess that there was a site selection process the company had to go through to decide where is the best place to be to execute and fulfill the agreement that you have with DOD and HHS. So if you don't mind, could you talk a little bit about the site selection process you went through and how it ultimately landed in Maryland?
It was a U.S.-wide selection process looking at multiple different potential areas. And Maryland really came to the forefront for really a number of different reasons. I'd say number one, when you're looking at where to go, number one is people. That's what makes your business sink or swim. And that's what this area has to offer. It's got a very strong industry and a very strong sector for training and engagement. It's also very close to government and the key players there in both NIH, FDA, Fort Detrick, ideal there. And then in terms of just its general location close to airports and ports and the like. So it comes out very favorably there. And then on the other aspects, it's really around state and local governments and their really willingness to engage and support. And we've been very, very happy with how welcoming and supportive both Frederick County and the Maryland state government have been in terms of providing incentives as well as helping wherever they can at the county level in terms of getting these permits and the like things through that you need in order to get buildings, get it from ground zero to operations in a timely manner. So it's been a great thing. And Maryland state, really great engagement, also very supportive of seeing some of their work in terms of working with our allies in Australia and getting tech transfer into the state, which was obviously an objective that they've had for quite some time, and then creating jobs for the state and providing incentives that scale with the jobs as we build that within the state.
Yeah, I think that the specifications for this site location were pretty dynamic. They were large and had some very specific uses of the facility, as well as the amount of people that you're going to involve. So can you talk a little bit about what the site is going to do and how many people are going to be required to fulfill all the obligations of this agreement?
So I'd say we have a couple of main targets. One is that we have to build something that makes sense as a business, as an ongoing entity that is sustainable. And that's been very much at the forefront with the government around this, as they don't want to just build a big white elephant that never gets used. So it has to fit within our business and our ongoing test development, and our ongoing core business is there to sustain it. And so in terms of how we're looking at staffing this, we're going to have one aspect of the facility. There'll be two buildings. One building in which we have a capacity that is there to meet the demands of an ongoing business for the foreseeable future, probably 3 to 5 years as we build the core business, and that will suffice. And the challenge for us then is to have the second building, which is really going to house even more automation that can go and ultimately deliver 500,000 tests per day to meet the demands really of the next pandemic as it comes. And so our challenge in terms of staffing is we'll have a core staff, and then we're going to need to staff it more than normal, but enough that you can scale rapidly. So you have the skills there that are able to keep that facility validated and in a state that's ready at any point in time to be switched into full operation. And we have the skills that can then go from normal operations of one shift per day, 5 days a week, to 24/7 pandemic response, get those machines running constantly. So you need that core capability to expand rapidly on the skill side as well as the equipment side.
From what my understanding is, Jeff, is that it's almost 200,000 square feet for the two buildings, but it's going to be what I'd classify a totally integrated operation that would have manufacturing, R&D, sales, distribution, and all functions you would need to have a totally independent business in one location in the United States. Is that true?
I'd say initially we're going to focus on manufacturing. So it will be, its core function is a manufacturing site. And then obviously all of the support functions that go with that in terms of your HR, IT, finance, sales and marketing. I think we'll see it as the market has shown that those don't necessarily have to be co-located. They'll go where they need to be. But at its core, we will be a manufacturing facility. And as you said, fully integrated. The idea is that we are not just reliant on a facility for the final assembly. It's a fully integrated supply chain. That's the end goal, is that we go right through the entire process and able to supply the U.S. with its capacity without reliance on an international supply chain. And other functions as we build down the track, things like R&D, we can look at those types of activities and where best to position those.
So I guess the key will be, and listeners will be interested, is as you ramp up, when do you believe the site will be first operational, and when does the recruitment process begin to hire the people for that first operation, and how many people will be in the first tranche?
We've been recruiting already, and there are certain roles that are tougher, and particularly with the pandemic, we have challenges around skill sharing and training. You just can't hop on a plane and go anywhere these days. So particularly as Australia is really managing its borders quite strictly, so it's quite difficult. And so some things we're having to recruit much earlier to provide that timing to get the training across. The start of our site validations in October were considerably delayed, as is many groups. We've seen, as everyone has come out of the pandemic, there has been an absolute building boom, which has actually forced us to redesign completely mid-project, really taking into consideration what we can get our hands on in terms of material. And so having to be very nimble on all of these approaches.
I guess it's a challenge because you've got a solution to the pandemic, but at the same time, you're encountering some of the problems that the pandemic is creating for people around the world. So it's a double management challenge for you, I would imagine.
Yes, absolutely. And it's going to continue at least through the next winter. And we really have to continue to be nimble and understand that the supply chains and the global disruption is just part of normal for the foreseeable future.
Well, the big topic right now is the Delta variant. And the question is that when the test was developed, the Delta variant didn't exist, but how does the test perform against the new variant?
So variant testing is something that obviously is front and center with the FDA and the RADx program. So we've been engaged with them and following along to make sure that we understand the performance as we go. So the Delta variant testing is set to be undertaken shortly, and then we can report that out in due course. But so far, in terms of what we're seeing in the market and in terms of our ability to monitor results coming in, we're not seeing anything that's alarming us at present.
Great, that's good news. One of the things that I'm very interested in, since we've been trying to increase the profile of this BioHealth Capital Region, as you know, we're ranking 4th right now within the top biopharma clusters, want to get to number 3 by 2023. But at the end of the day, your selection of this as the site, I think, is a very important indicator of the visibility and the growth within this region. Also, I think your knowledge of what's going on in this region and Dan's knowledge of this region hopefully played a role in the site selection process, because you understand what assets and resources there were to work with. So if you could sort of talk in the closing here a little bit about why this region is right for this decision right now, and also for the growth of the company, and how do you plan to get more engaged within this BioHealth Capital Region for Ellume USA?
I think that's, as we were sort of going through before, all the benefits of this area, it really has quite a lot of firepower, is what you would say, in this region across all of the aspects that are needed in order to form a comprehensive response to pandemics. And I think it's really great to see all of the organizations that have been so proactive in building it, like BioHealth Innovations Program, really getting engaged here to bring all the parties together. And we want Ellume to be a seat at that table as we engage with the other partners in the area and government to help navigate through the planning process to really get in front of the next one and make sure that we have, from Ellume side, a good diagnostics program in place that is there and able to respond in a way that makes the next pandemic nothing like this one has been.
I sort of gave you a softball there because we are very proud to have you join the BioHealth Innovation Board, which is nice. And our next board meeting will be in September, so you have a little time to get oriented a little bit more before we get you engaged in BHI board activities. But we think that you'll bring a different perspective to our board than what we've had in the past, even though we've had global companies sit on the board, but none of them that have really had to go through all this major decision process, all of the crisis management and the pandemic and everything, as Ellume USA is going through right now. So we're excited to have you join the board, Jeff. And also we think it's going to be a very good interaction with some of the other peers, some of which you may know and some of which you may not know at the board level.
Very much looking forward to it. And I think one of the things that I've really found quite heartening has been the industry response during this pandemic, and how I think everybody sort of understood we're all in it and all in the same boat and trying to do our best to respond. We're all human beings at the end as well, and understanding how important it is what we all do. And so I think it's a great collaborative environment that we have, and really looking forward to working with the partners to not just respond to the future pandemics, but also ongoing improving healthcare.
In closing, Jeff, I'm going to give you a little open mic. If you have any last words you'd like to share with the listeners, and if anybody wants to get more information about Ellume USA, or if you need any additional exposure in your recruitment efforts, we'd be glad to help you make some of those needs aware to the people in the community. But do you have any closing comments you'd like to share with the listeners at this time?
No, just really looking forward to it. It's been a great pleasure so far dealing with everyone so far, and looking forward to becoming a long-term player in the region and meeting our goals.
Great. Well, thank you very much. This has been a very interesting and educational BioTalk podcast with Jeff Boyle, president of Ellume USA. I think what we'll do, Jeff, is to, if you don't mind, we'll try to come back maybe in 6 months after you're fully up and operational, and then you can give everybody an update on how everything's progressed here. And I'm not going to say 3 months in October. Let's get beyond October. Let's get the first quarter of operation once you're operating, and then come back and talk about the successes.
I look forward to that day myself. So.
Well, good luck to you. And if there's anything we can do to help you, please let us know.
Terrific. All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.